The wind howled across the Montana plains, carrying the scent of sagebrush and regret. I'd come to the Double Bar Ranch to outrun my past, but the ghosts of Chicago clung tighter than I'd hoped. My name is Elias Torres, and at 28 I was starting over again. I'd fled the city after a scandal that left my name smeared across tabloids. A rising chef, outed in a blaze of betrayal by a lover who sold our story to the press. The headlines screamed, "Celebrity Chef's Secret Affair," and my career, my life, crumbled. So, I answered an ad for a ranch hand, trading Michelin stars for mucking stalls, hoping the wide-open spaces would swallow my shame. The Double Bar was a sprawling operation, 10,000 acres of cattle and dreams tucked against the Rockies. My first day, I stood at the edge of a dirt road, duffel bags slung over my shoulder, staring at a horizon that felt too big to hold me. The foreman, Caleb Hawthorne, waited by a weathered barn, his broad shoulders filling out a faded flannel shirt. At 32, he had the kind of face that held stories. Sun-creased, with hazel eyes that seemed to see through you. "You Elias?" he called, voice low and steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. I nodded, my throat tight. "Don't care where you're from," he said, tossing me a pair of work gloves. "Just do the job." I wanted to disappear into the work, to let the ache of hauling hay bales and repairing fences drown out the memories of camera flashes and whispered slurs. But Caleb was everywhere, checking my knots, correcting my stance, his presence a quiet weight. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was deliberate, like he measured each word. "City boy like you," he said one evening, leaning against a fence post as we watched the herd settle. "What's got you running to a place like this?" I froze, my heart thudding. "Just needed a change," I muttered, avoiding his gaze. He didn't push, but those eyes lingered, like he knew I was lying. The other hands, 6 men and 2 women, ranging from grizzled veterans to a wiry 19-year-old named Sam, kept their distance at first. I was the outsider, the guy with soft hands and a city accent. But Sam, non-binary and fiercely proud, took a liking to me. "Folks here don't care who you are," they said, tossing me a beer one night by the bunkhouse fire. "Long as you pull your weight." I wanted to believe them, but I'd heard that before, right before the knives came out. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch became a rhythm. Dawn patrols, branding calves, fixing barbed wire under a sky that felt endless. I learned to ride, my thighs aching from the saddle, and Caleb was always there, patient but firm. "Keep your heels down," he'd say, his hand brushing my leg to adjust my posture. The touch was brief, professional, but it sent a jolt through me I hadn't felt in years. I pushed it down, buried it under the weight of my past. Love had burned me once. I wasn't ready to bleed again. One night, a storm rolled in, the kind that turned the sky bruise purple and shook the bunkhouse walls. Caleb and I were the last to finish securing the herd, drenched and shivering as we rode back to the barn. Inside, the air smelled of hay and rain, and we stood too close, stripping off soaked jackets. His shirt clung to his chest, and I caught myself staring, my breath catching. "You're not half bad at this," he said, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "For a city boy." I laughed, the sound surprising me, and for a moment, the weight of Chicago felt lighter. But the past has a way of catching up. That night, in the bunkhouse, I overheard Sam whispering to another hand, Riley, about a new gossip rag circulating in town. My name was in it again. Some reporter had tracked me to Montana, spinning lies about my disgrace. My stomach churned. I'd come here to vanish, but the world wouldn't let me. I lay awake, the storm raging outside, wondering if I'd ever outrun the shame. The next morning, Caleb found me in the barn, staring blankly at a saddle I was supposed to mend. "You look like hell," he said, leaning against a post. I shrugged, my jaw tight. He stepped closer, his voice softer. "Whatever you're carrying, Elias, it don't define you. Not here." His words hit like a punch, and I wanted to tell him everything. The betrayal, the headlines, the way I'd stopped trusting anyone. But I just nodded, afraid of what might spill out if I opened my mouth. By the end of my first month, I was stronger, my hands calloused, my body adapting to the ranch's demands. But Caleb was the real challenge. Every glance, every quiet moment we shared, checking fences at dusk, sharing coffee at dawn, felt like a thread pulling me toward something I wasn't sure I could handle. He was steady, grounded, the kind of man who didn't flinch at a stampede or a broken heart. And I was a mess, a city boy with too many secrets and not enough courage. One evening, as we rode out to check a remote pasture, the sun dipped low, painting the hills gold. Caleb stopped his horse, gesturing for me to do the same. "Look at that," he said, nodding toward the horizon. I followed his gaze, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. "You ever feel like the world's too big to hold all your mistakes?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He turned, his eyes locking on mine. "Yeah," he said quietly, "but sometimes it's big enough to hold something better, too." That moment by the pasture lingered, a spark I couldn't shake. Caleb's words, simple, unguarded, stayed with me as we rode back in silence, the Montana sky swallowing us whole. I wanted to believe in something better, but trust was a muscle I hadn't used in years. The next week, the ranch buzzed with preparations for the annual cattle drive, a grueling trek to move the herd to winter pastures. It was all hands on deck, and I threw myself into the work, hoping exhaustion would quiet the questions circling my head. Caleb was everywhere, barking orders with a calm authority that made the chaos feel manageable. "Elias, you're with me on the north flank," he said one morning, tossing me a rope. I caught it, my fingers brushing his, and the heat of that touch burned through my gloves. The drive began at dawn, a symphony of hooves and shouts under a sky streaked with pink. I rode beside Caleb, our horses matching stride, and for the first time I felt like I belonged. But belonging scared me. In Chicago, I'd let myself get close to someone, Marcus, my ex, and it ended with my life in ruins. I couldn't afford to let Caleb in, not when I was still piecing myself back together. Halfway through the drive, disaster struck. A calf bolted, spooking the herd, and a stampede erupted, a wall of muscle and dust charging toward a ravine. Caleb shouted for me to cut left, and we rode hard, leaning into the wind, trying to turn the herd. My heart pounded, not just from the adrenaline but from the way Caleb moved, fearless, precise, like he was born for this. We managed to redirect the cattle, but my horse stumbled, throwing me into the dirt. Pain shot through my shoulder, and for a moment, the world was just dust and chaos. Caleb was at my side in seconds, his hand steady as he pulled me up. "You okay?" he asked, his voice cutting through the haze. I nodded, wincing, but his grip lingered, his thumb brushing my arm. "You scared the hell out of me," he said, almost too low to hear. My breath caught, and I looked away, afraid he'd see the mess of want and fear in my eyes. That night, camped under a sky full of stars, the crew gathered around a fire, passing a flask and swapping stories. Sam, ever the instigator, nudged me. "So, Elias, you gonna tell us what brought you out here? Or we gotta guess?" The group laughed, but I felt the weight of their curiosity. Caleb sat across the fire, his gaze steady on me, and I knew he was waiting, too. Just needed a fresh start, I said, my voice flat. Sam raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Caleb, though, didn't look away. Later, as the others slept, I found Caleb by the horses, checking their tack. The moonlight cast shadows across his face, and I couldn't stop myself from speaking. "You ever run from something?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused, his hands still on a bridle. "Yeah," he said finally. "My family didn't take kindly to who I am. Left home at 18, haven't looked back." His words hit me like a confession, and I realized he was offering me a piece of himself. A piece that mirrored my own jagged edges. "You're gay," I said. Not a question but a recognition. He nodded, no shame, just truth. "And you?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I swallowed hard, the weight of my past pressing down. "Yeah," I admitted, the word raw in my throat. "But it cost me everything." I told him about Marcus, the affair, the betrayal, the way the world turned my love into a headline. Caleb listened, his silence a kind of anchor. When I finished, he stepped closer, his voice low. "You're not your past, Elias. You're what you choose to be now." The cattle drive stretched on, days of dust and sweat blurring together. Caleb and I worked side by side, our rhythm growing easier, our silences less heavy. But the gossip rag lingered in my mind, a ticking bomb. One afternoon, Riley, a gruff hand in his 40s, cornered me by the chuck wagon. "Heard you're some big-shot chef," he said, his tone sharp. "Also heard you got run out of Chicago for some dirty business." My stomach dropped, but before I could respond, Caleb appeared, his voice like steel. "Riley, you got work to do. Leave it." Riley backed off, but the damage was done. The ranch wasn't the sanctuary I'd hoped for. That night, I couldn't sleep, the weight of exposure crushing me. I slipped out of my tent and found Caleb by the fire, his face lit by the glow. "They know," I said, my voice breaking. "It's gonna start all over again." He stood, closing the distance between us. "Let them talk," he said fiercely. "You're one of us now. They don't get to take that from you." His hand found mine, a brief, grounding touch, and I felt something shift, a crack in the walls I'd built. By the time we reached the winter pastures, I was exhausted but alive in a way I hadn't been in years. Caleb rode beside me, his presence a quiet promise. As we watched the herd settle, he turned to me, his voice soft but sure. "You're stronger than you think, Elias, and you're not alone." The words sank into me, warm and dangerous, like the first step toward something I couldn't take back. The winter pastures were a sea of grass, rippling under a sky that felt close enough to touch. Caleb's words from the cattle drive echoed in my head, a lifeline I was afraid to grab. I'd spent so long running from Chicago from myself that the idea of not being alone felt like a trap. Back at the ranch, life settled into a new rhythm. The days were shorter, the air crisp with the promise of snow. I threw myself into the work, hoping it would keep my thoughts from spiraling. But Caleb was a constant, his presence both comfort and challenge. He'd catch my eye across the barn, offer a nod, or brush past me with a purpose that felt deliberate. Each moment chipped away at my defenses, and I hated how much I wanted to let them fall. One afternoon, while we were repairing a windmill, Sam climbed up beside me, their grin sharp. "You and Caleb, huh? Got some serious vibes going." I nearly dropped my wrench, my face burning. "It's not like that," I said, too quick. Sam laughed. "Sure, city boy. Keep telling yourself that." Their words stuck, needling me. I wasn't ready to name what was growing between me and Caleb, but denying it felt like a lie. The gossip rag surfaced again, this time in town. I'd gone with Sam to pick up supplies, and at the general store, I saw it. A cheap tabloid with my face on the cover, the headline screaming about my fall from grace. The clerk, a woman in her 60s, gave me a pitying look. I grabbed the supplies and bolted, my chest tight. Sam caught up, their voice gentle. "You don't owe anyone an explanation, Elias. Not here." But the shame burned, a reminder that my past was a shadow I couldn't shake. That night, I found Caleb in the tack room, polishing a saddle. I didn't plan to tell him, but the words spilled out. The tabloid, the clerk's stare, the way it felt like Chicago all over again. He set the saddle down, his jaw tight. "People love to tear down what they don't understand," he said. "But you're not that story. You're the guy who rode through a stampede, who's learning to be a damn good hand." His voice was fierce, and when he stepped closer, I didn't back away. "You deserve better than running," he said, his hand grazing my shoulder. The touch was electric, and I wanted to lean into it, but fear held me back. The ranch's annual harvest dance was a week later, a tradition that drew hands and locals to a barn lit with string lights and filled with music. I went, mostly to avoid questions, but I felt out of place among the laughter and twirling couples. Caleb was there, leaning against a beam, his eyes finding mine across the crowd. He wore a clean flannel, his hair slightly tamed, and I couldn't look away. When a slow song started, he crossed the room, his hand outstretched. "Dance with me," he said, not a question but a quiet command. My heart raced, but I took his hand, letting him pull me into the crowd. We moved together, awkward at first, his calloused hand warm in mine. The world narrowed to the press of his body, the steady rhythm of his breath. "You're shaking," he murmured, his lips close to my ear. "Scared." I swallowed, my voice barely a whisper. "Terrified." He smiled, soft and real, and for the first time, I let myself feel the pull between us, raw and undeniable. But the moment shattered. Riley, drunk and loud, staggered over, his voice cutting through the music. "Didn't peg you for the type, Caleb?" he slurred, his eyes flicking to me with disgust. The barn went quiet, heads turning. I froze, the old shame flooding back. Caleb's grip tightened, his voice low and dangerous. "Walk away, Riley." The older man sneered but backed off, and the music resumed, but the damage was done. I pulled away, my chest tight, and slipped out into the night. Caleb found me by the corral, the stars bright above us. "Don't let him get to you," he said, his voice urgent. "He's just noise." But it wasn't just Riley. It was the world, the headlines, the fear that letting myself love again would end in ruin. I told Caleb as much, my voice breaking. He stepped closer, his hands framing my face. "I'm not them," he said fiercely. "And you're not your mistakes." Then he kissed me, slow and sure, and the world fell away. It was just us, two broken men finding something whole in the dark. The kiss changed everything. I wanted to believe in it, in him, but doubt gnawed at me. The next day, I overheard Riley talking to another hand, spreading rumors about me and Caleb. The ranch, my refuge, was starting to feel like a cage again. I didn't know how to stay, but I didn't know how to leave either. The kiss haunted me, a memory I couldn't shake as I went through the motions of ranch work. Caleb's lips had been a promise, but promises had broken me before. I kept my distance, avoiding his gaze during morning rounds, but the ranch was too small to hide forever. Winter crept closer, the air sharp with frost. The hands were busy preparing for the cold, insulating barns, checking stockpile supplies. But the tension from the dance lingered. Riley's whispers had spread, and I felt eyes on me, some curious, some cold. Sam, ever loyal, stuck close, their presence a quiet shield. "Folks'll talk," they said one morning, helping me stack hay. "But they'll get over it. Always do." I wanted to believe them, but I'd seen how fast acceptance could turn to scorn. Caleb, though, wouldn't let me retreat. He found me one evening in the barn, brushing down a mare. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice steady but laced with hurt. I kept my eyes on the horse, my hands moving mechanically. "I'm not good at this, Caleb. Trusting people. Letting them in." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "I'm not asking for everything," he said. "Just a chance." His honesty disarmed me, and when I finally looked at him, his eyes held no judgment, only patience. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he smiled, a small victory. We started finding moments, quiet ones, away from the others. Coffee shared at dawn, rides to check fences, late nights in the tack room talking about nothing and everything. Caleb told me about his childhood, growing up in a small Wyoming town where being gay meant being invisible. He'd fought for every piece of himself, carving out a life on his terms. I told him about Chicago, the rush of the kitchen, the betrayal that shattered it all. With each story, the walls between us thinned, and I began to imagine a future where I wasn't running. But the past wasn't done with me. One morning, a truck pulled up to the ranch, and a man in a cheap suit stepped out. A reporter, his camera glinting like a weapon. He'd tracked me from Chicago, sniffing for a story. "Elias Torres," he called, his voice smug. "Care to comment on your new life?" My blood ran cold, and I froze, the old panic surging. Caleb was there in an instant, his arm a barrier between me and the man. "Get off this land," he growled, his voice like gravel. The reporter smirked but left, and I sank against the barn, my breath ragged. "They'll never stop," I whispered. Caleb knelt beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "They don't get to win," he said. "Not here." The incident shook me, but it also woke me up. I was tired of running, tired of letting shame dictate my life. That night, I found Caleb by the fire, the ranch quiet around us. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice raw. "But I want this. Us." His eyes softened, and he pulled me close, his arms a steady anchor. "We'll figure it out," he said, and for the first time I believed him. The ranch owner, a gruff woman named Margaret, called a meeting the next day. Rumors had reached her, and she wanted to clear the air. I braced for the worst, but she surprised me. "This is a working ranch," she said, her voice firm. "I don't care who you love or what you've done, long as you do your job." She looked at me, then Caleb, and nodded. "Your family here." The words hit hard, and I saw Caleb's shoulders relax, a weight lifting. But Riley wasn't done. He cornered me later, his face twisted with disdain. "Your trouble," he spat, "bringing your city mess here." Before I could respond, Sam appeared, their voice sharp. "Back off, Riley. You don't speak for us." To my surprise, other hands nodded, their support quiet but real. Riley stormed off, and I realized the ranch wasn't just a place. It was a choice, a community that could hold me if I let it. Caleb and I grew closer, our connection deepening through stolen moments and shared silences. But the reporter's visit lingered, a reminder that the world outside wasn't as forgiving. I knew I'd have to face it eventually, But for now, I had Caleb, the ranch, and a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I could build something new. Winter settled over the double bar, blanketing the ranch in snow and silence. Caleb and I were a quiet force now, our bond unspoken but woven into every shared glance, every brush of hands. I was learning to trust again, but the world beyond the ranch loomed, a threat I couldn't ignore. One morning, as I shoveled snow from the barn doors, a letter arrived, forwarded from Chicago. It was from Marcus, my ex, and my hands shook as I opened it. He'd written to apologize, claiming he'd never meant for our story to hit the press. He wanted forgiveness, a chance to talk. The words cut deep, reopening wounds I tried to bury. I burned the letter in the bunkhouse fire, but the ashes didn't erase the ache. Caleb noticed the change in me, the way I grew quiet, my smiles forced. "What's eating you?" he asked one evening, as we sat on the porch, the stars sharp above us. I told him about the letter, about Marcus, about the guilt and anger I still carried. Caleb listened, his hand resting on mine. "He doesn't get to define you," he said. "You're not that guy anymore." His words were a lifeline, but I wasn't sure I believed them. The reporter returned a week later, this time with a local news crew, their van parked at the ranch gate. They wanted an interview, a chance to set the record straight. Margaret sent them away, her voice like iron, but I knew they'd be back. The ranch hands rallied around me, Sam and the others forming a quiet wall of support, but the pressure was suffocating. I felt like I was drowning, my past pulling me under. That night, I found Caleb by the corral, the moonlight glinting off the snow. "I can't keep running," I said, my voice breaking, "but I don't know how to fight this." He turned, his eyes fierce. "You fight by staying," he said, "by building something real. With me." He pulled me into his arms, and I let myself sink into him, the warmth of his embrace chasing away the cold. "I love you, Elias," he said, the words raw and true. My breath caught, and I whispered it back, the first time I'd let myself feel it fully. The next day, I made a choice. I called a friend in Chicago, a former colleague who'd stood by me through the scandal. With her help, I drafted a statement, not for the reporter, but for myself. I posted it online, a simple truth. I was Elias Torres, a man who'd made mistakes, loved deeply, and was building a new life. I didn't owe the world my shame. The response was mixed, some hate, some support, but it felt like freedom. The ranch hands read it, and to my surprise, they clapped me on the back, their acceptance a quiet strength. Even Riley, chastened by Margaret's warning, kept his distance. Caleb stood by me, his pride in me a light I hadn't known I needed. "You're braver than you know," he said, and I started to believe him. Spring came, the snow melting into streams that fed the pastures. Caleb and I were planning a future, not just on the ranch, but together. We talked about a small cabin, a place of our own, where we could build something lasting. The ranch remained our home, its people our family, but we were carving out a space for us. One evening, as we rode out to the pasture where it all began, the sunset painted the hills gold, just like that first moment. Caleb stopped his horse, his hand finding mine. "You're my something better," he said, echoing his words from months ago. I smiled, my heart full. "And you're mine." I'd come to the double bar to escape, but I'd found so much more. A home, a love, a chance to be whole. The past would always be there, a shadow on the horizon, but it no longer defined me. With Caleb by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next, not as a man running, but as a man standing tall.